think we're good. And here we are, as promised, live from the Smokies, special Robert Burns birthday concert. And I'm just checking everything, make sure everything's plugged in and ready to go, which I believe it is. Except this little thing got tilted up. And when I say as promised, because I wasn't sure, because it's very cold outside this week, but we do have a fireside inside, and that was my worry, was that I wanted it to be a fireside concert, and it still is a fireside concert, even though we're inside. So welcome everybody to the Blaxcotsman in the Smokies. My name is Mike Ogletree, I am the Blaxcotsman, and this week we're going to be doing a special Robert Burns supper, as it were. It's not a supper because there's no supper, but we'll be following a little bit the format that they follow in the Robert Burns supper. And the reason that we're doing it is because tomorrow, the 25th, is Robert Burns' birthday, and they celebrate this all over the world every year. And they usually have large gatherings of people together, but somehow I think that won't be happening this year, because even we had to postpone or cancel ours and turn it into a virtual Robert Burns supper. So here we are, we're going to do it anyway, and we're going to have some fun, because Burns was an interesting character, and there's a lot that you can talk about and sing about and speechify about and drink about with him. But I'm going to start off by singing a little song that he wrote about his love for the Highlands of Scotland. He was a lowlander from Ayrshire, in the lowlands of Scotland, which is my country, as it were. Just let me turn this up a bit. Yeah. And but he loved the Highlands, so this is a little song that he wrote about his love for the Highlands. My heart's in the Highlands, my heart is not here. My heart's in the Highlands, I'm chasing the deer, I'm chasing the wild deer and following the road. My heart's in the Highlands, wherever I go. my heart is in the Highlands for sure. So, welcome everybody. We are in Western North Carolina. This is a place called Maggie Valley. Beautiful part of Western North Carolina in the mountains. So it's appropriate that my heart is in the Highlands because I'm in the Highlands too. But that one was about Scotland. But here we are. This is a place called Meadowlark Motel, and it's my home. It has been my home for the past couple of years, so I feel right at home here as much as I do in Scotland, except the weather here is considerably more clement, shall we say. Anyway, enough about that. We're here to celebrate Robert Burns' birthday. And for those of you who don't know who Robert Burns was or is, he is the honorary poet laureate of Scotland, who lived during the 18th century, 1769 to 1796. So is that 1760? My history is terrible. Feel free to correct me on that, but he lived about 35 years. And 1765 to 1796. Nah, it's terrible. Terrible I am. Anyway, that just gives you a chance to correct me on that. Somebody who knows his birthday, correct me on that. Because this is purely spontaneous. Because I'm from Ayrshire, and it's like I knew the man, I grew up with him, so I feel qualified to talk about him and sing his songs. And one of the things that Burns is famous for is the fact that he was a simple man. From Ayrshire, which is where I'm from, in the west coast of Scotland, he was a farmer. His family was a farming family, and his main occupation was as a ploughman. So he was famous as the ploughman poet. But just a bit of background about that time. It was a time of what they called the Enlightenment in Scotland. So education and study and learning were things that were highly prized by the people of Scotland at the time, so much so that the church encouraged and in some cases mandated people to put their money aside and save up and open schools so that the children could be educated and become part of this great literati movement. And Burns' father, being a farmer, was one of those people who did that. He got some of his friends, farmer friends, together in Ayrshire, and they banded together and pooled their resources and opened a school. And Burns had the opportunity as a young man to go to school where he learned French, he learned Latin, he learned, the classic poets and writers that they would teach in a classic curriculum of the time. So that meant that he was exposed to all of this great education and upbringing, which in turn led him to write poetry and have correspondence with people, write letters with people who were quote unquote above his class. But because he took to education and wanted to know more, he had a thirst for knowledge, he corresponded with people that were perhaps the landlords of his father's shareholding farm, for instance. He had correspondence with other people like that in the neighbourhood who could read and who were learned. So he developed friendships with these people, which I'll tell you about later. But at the same time as doing that, he still had to work. He still had to go out into the fields and do his share of work for the farm. And it was during, which his work was as a ploughman, of course. And it was during his work one day as he was out ploughing the fields with his assistant that he came across a little mouse's nest. What happened was they were out in the fields of one of his father's farms, one of the fields on his father's farm, and they were working, they were ploughing the field and turning it over and getting ready for the winter. So as he was doing this, all of a sudden, bang, turns over a piece of land, and there's a little mouse's nest destroyed completely. The little baby mice and things, and of course, to his assistant, this was vermin. He was getting ready with the shovel, to go in there and whack them. But Burns said, no, hold on a minute. And as was his habit at the time, he would stop what he was doing and think and contemplate things. And the story goes that was that moment where he was inspired to write the poem, To a Mouse. And you might not know that poem, but you'll know of it. Which that story by Steinbeck, Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. That whole story is inspired by one line in the Robert Burns poem, To a Mouse, Of Mice and Men, the John Steinbeck poem. And then when you say, the best laid schemes of mice and men gang after Gley, it's straight out of this poem. So, I would like to recite that poem right now for you, or in order to just recite it for you. It's a beautiful poem, and if you care to look it up and get the translation, you'll get the complete gist of it. But this is it, and I'm looking for it here. I know it, but I just want to a mouse. This is what they call the Bible. To a Mouse. This is what they call the Bible, this book. Robert Burns's collected works. Alright, so here he is. He's out in the field, and hello everybody online. Greetings from Kilmarnock, Bobby Peacock, Robert Peacock, Kilmarnock in Scotland. Stevie Bow, Robbie Burns was born in Ayr. Knew he's doing in George's Square. If you want to see him there, hop on the bus and pay your fare. There you go, spontaneous poetry. That's from Stevie Bow. I guess he's from Ayrshire. Greetings from Livingston, Scotland. So people from all over, I know there are people from New York, Ireland, all over the place. So welcome to Western North Carolina and Robert Burns's dinner, supper concert. So here we are. Imagine he's out in the field with his assistant, they're ploughing the fields, and all of a sudden, bang, little mouse's nest turned over, destroyed, this little mouse. So here's what the poem he wrote inspired by that incident. Wee sleeke, coorin, timorous beastie, oh, what a panic's in thy breastie. Thou needna start a war sae hasty, wi' bicker and brattle. I would be loath to run and chase thee wi' murder and prattle. I doubt no whiles, but I'm truly sorry that man's dominion has broken nature's sacred union, that justifies that ill opinion that makes thee startle at me, thy poor earth-born companion and fellow mortal. I doubt not whiles, but thou may thieve. What then, poor beastie, thou maun leave. A dame an acre and a thrave's a sma' request. I'll get a blessing with a lave and never miss it. Thy wee bit housey, too, in ruins. Its silly was, the winds are strewn, and Nathan now to bid a new in the foggage green, and bleak December's winds ensuing, baith snell and keen. Thou saw the fields laid weir and wast, and weary winter coming fast, and weary here beneath the blast thou thought to dwell, till crash the cruel coulters pass, came through thy cell. That wee bit heap of leaves and stibble has cost thee money a weary nibble. Now thou's turned out for all thy trouble, but house are hard to thaw the winter's sleety dribble, and Cranrach called. But Mousie, thou art know thy lane, in proving foresight may be vain. The best laid schemes of mice and men gan afterglay, and lay us now but grief and pain for promised joy. Still, thou art blessed compared with me. The present only toucheth thee, but och, I backward cast my eye on prospects drear, and forward, though I canna see, I guess and fear. It's a bit of a tragic poem, but basically it's saying the mouse basically is just like him. In fact, it's better off than him, because the mouse only lives for the present, whereas he worries about the past and worries about the future. So it's a 6 1/2 kind of existence. Anyway, that was To a Mouse by Robert Burns. And my name's Mike Ogletree. This is the Blaxcotsman live in the Smokies. The Smokies being in western North Carolina in the United States of America. And here we are. We're going to continue now with a little story. Traditionally, a Burns supper has got several elements, and one of those elements is the toast to the lassies. That's my favourite part, actually. So we're going to do a couple of toasts to the lassies in song. This one is a song about Burns' early life, when he used to spend most of his time in the fields. This was one of his first poems. So he'd be working out in the fields all day, but all he had on his mind was his girlfriend, his Nanny O. This is a song called My Nanny O. Behind yon hills or Lugar flows, my moors and mosses many go. The wintry sun, the day has closed, and I'll walk to Nanny O. The western wind is loud and shrill, the night's days murk and rainy go. But I'll get my pride and up I'll steal, and o'er the hills to Nanny O. My Nanny's charming, sweet and young, may art for miles to 1 year old. May ill befall the flattering tongue that would beguile my Nanny O. Her face is fair, her heart is true, is spotless as she's bonny gold. The opening gown, what with you, nay purer is the Nanny O. Hey, my Nanny O. Ooh, my Nanny O. Hey, my Nanny O. Ooh, my Nanny O. 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 That's my bit. A country lad is my degree, and few there be that can me hold. But what care to Nanny Ho. Come wheel, come wool, I care nobody. I'll tap what have no sentimental. May other care in life have I, but live in love. Oh, my Nanny Ho, hey, my Nanny Ho. Ooh, my Nanny Ho. 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 That's what he'd do. He didn't care a bit. He was just thinking of his girlfriend all the time, his nanny o. Nanny o is Scottish dialect for my girlfriend, my love, my sweetheart. That was my nanny. That was how they would describe him. And a man would describe his girlfriend. And that was what he thought. That was what he thought about all the time. And as soon as the closing time came from his work, he would be across the fields to find it. And Burns was famous because he wrote in the Scottish dialect during this enlightened period in Scotland, because all this education and advancement came at a price, and the price was to renounce a part of your Scottishness, and that part was a little bit to do with fashion. They outlawed certain dress codes connected with the wearing of the plaid, the tartan, made it against the law to wear the plaid on certain occasions, at certain times, certain places. So I'm wearing, for instance, trousers, trews as they call them, because during Burns' time it was frowned upon to wear a kilt with a plaid in it. So you don't see many photographs of people from that time wearing kilts with plaid in them, because it was illegal or against the rules and against the law. So that was just one of the prices that they had to pay for these advancements in education and becoming a more respected nation. And another price that they had to pay is that they wanted people to give up their language. And this was not popular on the West Coast at all. And as a result, Burns, ever the rebel, wrote his poems in the Scottish dialect. Now, this was something that evolved out of a pastime that they had in Scotland at the time, and probably in other places. But in Scotland in particular, the men would get round together and they'd make up songs and they'd make up poems. And usually they were a bit blue, you know. You can find collections of Burns's blue poems on the internet if you look for them. But out of that, and it was done for humour, of course. And not only were they blue, but they would make fun of local customs, like they'd make fun of local people, judges and lawyers and priests and teachers and all that. So this is how Burns' poetry, his skills at poetry, evolved out of this kind of pastime that they would do with their friends. They get drunk and make up, dirty songs and funny songs and make fun of people. And Burns, when this push towards anglicising people's language came, of course, Burns and his friends were completely against it, and it just pushed them to write even more songs and poems in the Scottish dialect, even more outrageous ones. And so Burns became famous for being this kind of person who was really good at making up these funny stories and blue songs about people, and famous because he could do it in the Scottish dialect and make it work and make it rhyme and all that. So, cut a long story short, he was down in his luck, and he was fed up at one point in his life because he wanted to be rich and famous, and it wasn't happening. So he decided that he was going to throw his lot in and emigrate, like many young men did in those days, to Jamaica, and try his hand at farming out in Jamaica, because he'd heard, that there was good money to be made for farmers in Jamaica. But his brother persuaded him, before he left, to publish some of the poems that he'd been writing, because he'd been writing these poems and passing them out to his friends. And his brother said, "Your poems are so good, why don't you get a little commission from some of your friends, get some money together and publish your poems before you go?" And he persuaded him to do it. So that's what happened. Burns decided, "Yeah, I'm going to do that, I'll do that, that's a good idea. It's a good idea, brother of mine." So as I said, he could write, and he had friends who were part of the middle class, as it were, the farmers and the landlords. So he wrote to them all, and it turned out that they were all interested in commissioning a copy of his poems, should he write them. And he got a lot of commissions. So it turns out that when he wrote his book of poems and it was published, it became a huge hit, sold hundreds and hundreds of copies, and he came to the attention of the literati in Edinburgh. Completely different place, by the way. He was on the west coast of Scotland. You're talking about working class farmers, miners. I don't know if they had mines then, but working class people. Whereas Edinburgh on the east coast was the seat of learning. There were universities, there were doctors, there were banks, there were politicians. All this was happening over in the east coast. So the east coast was where this movement of literati, this education, was taking place, and they were, they were the self-proclaimed custodians of Scottish progress at the time, and that progress meant that we were to speak English and not these Scottish dialects. So they didn't know what to do about this chap, this ploughman poet from the west coast of Scotland, who'd become a huge literary success. His book of poems he was like a Bob Dylan of his times, because people just loved his poems. So what they did was they invited him to come to Edinburgh and see what this was all about. Who is this guy? Now Burns was no idiot, and he played up this whole image of him being a farmer. They thought of him as a ploughman poet. So he played this up, and when he went to Edinburgh, he was dressed kind of like he was dressed like a well-to-do farmer amongst all these literate people. But anyway, that whole incident that happened to him after his book was a success, of course, he didn't go to Jamaica. He went to Edinburgh instead to bask a little bit in the glory and the success of his poems. And that is a whole other phase and story in his life that you should, if you're at all interested in Scottish history and the story of Burns' life, that is a great part in his life that is well worth following. But there you go. That's a kind of a little bit of a immortal memory, as it were, which is part again of the Burns supper thing. The Burns supper sequence of events, the immortal memory. I'm going to sing a song now that I'd like to just dedicate to anybody who is going through any kind of sickness or illness at the moment. This next song Burns wrote for a girl who looked after him when he was sick, when he was ill. And he kind of had the idea, you know, that because she was doing that she was in love with him and he was in love with her. But, you know, that was just Burns, ever the romantic, even on his deathbed. But anyway, I think her name was Jessie. And she would come and she would bring him a bowl of soup, and she would help his wife, Jean Armour, she would help his wife look after him when he was in his bed, when he was sick. And she would also come and play the harpsichord, and he loved that. He loved her coming and playing. So he wrote this next song for her. And I like to think that it's a kind of anthem for people who need help anywhere, because he wrote it in her person, as if she was the one singing this to him, because it was like she would take care of him no matter what. Like she was always there, always helping him. So I've taken the words for that song and turned it into one of my own. And as you might have noticed, I play with a little bit of a reggae feel. So I call it Scottish reggae. And this is a song called In the Cold Blast. It's called In the Cold Wind. Shelter thee, odds it misfortunes, bitter storms, around thee blow, the wheel should be my bosom, to shade it all, Scottish reggae music playing now. Scottish reggae music playing up. Black and bare, the desert where a paradise. If thou wert there, or when I'm on it, oh the gold, with thee to reign, the brightest jewel in my crown would be my queen, Scottish reggae music playing now. Scottish reggae music playing, Scottish reggae music, Scottish reggae playing, Scottish reggae music, Scottish reggae. So I kind of stole it. When you're in the cold blast, some Scottish reggae. So I kind of imagine that Jessie, the lady in question here, was playing Scottish reggae on the harpsichord for Burns as he lay in his dying bed. There you go. It's a nice fantasy. Of course it wasn't, because reggae hadn't been termed then yet. I'm not saying it didn't exist, because it could have done, but it hadn't been termed yet. Hello, my gay Kayvon! Tomorrow is going to be Brabby Burns' 261st birthday. Think about that, 261st. That's quite something. You remember in this chat. Thank you for that piece of information. That's my friend Kayvon Zahidi in Canada there. Where are you? You in Toronto, Kayvon? He loves Scottish reggae music. Daphne's here. Hello, Daphne, from New York. Listening from Auchtermuchty. That's where the Proclaimers are from, Auchtermuchty, if I'm not right, if I'm not wrong. If I'm right and not wrong. Are you alright? No, I'm a bit left. But yeah, the Proclaimers of 500 Miles fame are from Auchtermuchty, and it's one of my favourite Scottish songs. I always do it, well, I do it as an encore. But Auchtermuchty, not everyone can say that. Especially when you look at how it's spelled. Give on again. Gordon McRae, listening from Auchtermuchty in Fife. So great, folks. Thanks for tuning in now. Let me think. 1760. Yeah. 1765 to 1796. Is that what I said in the first place? Yeah, because 1765, 1796. That is 32 years old, that would make him. I thought he was 37. 70. Anyway, somebody correct me. Oh, look, we got the great God Google here. I can look it up. I always was bad at history. And it was one of those things, you know, at school. I loved history, but because I could never remember the dates, I always failed it and I always thought I was terrible at history. So I never followed up. But it turned out later on that when I went to live in Italy, there we go, 1759, January the 25th, 1759 to July 21st, 1796, 1759 to 37, that's right, I knew it was 37. I should have been able to extrapolate that. But isn't that terrible? Like, I loved history, but because I could never remember dates, I always failed my history exam. You know? So I never took up history as an interest. And then, turned out when I started travelling and seeing all these fantastic historic places and learning about historic events, I loved it. I was completely taken. And it turned out that I had a great love and in certain ways a talent for history in terms of understanding and appreciating the value and the importance of learning about, you know, cultures, old people, you know, old civilizations, that kind of thing. So, you know, it's just one of those things about education that always mystified me. I'd like to sing a song now. Again, song, a love song. And we'll toast the lassies here again as part of the traditional Burn Supper. Let's just make sure, let's see who's online. Make sure we're not ignoring people. Yeah, we'll toast the lassies with this one as remembering Burns, Robert Burns, on his birthday, which will be tomorrow. We'll toast the lassies with this one. This is the one that contains the line, "Old nature swears the lovely dears, her noblest work she classes all. Her prentice hand she tried on man, and then she made the lasses all. So basically Burns is saying nature experimented on creation of a human being when she created man, right? And even here, nature is a woman, right? Her, the mother nature. So she experimented with creating the perfect being when she created man. That was the experiment. The perfection, the perfect being turned out to be woman. And Burns says that in this poem. So, it's just to give you some kind of idea of, and he was 1000% sincere about this. To give you some idea of the sentiment that surrounded the feeling men had toward women at that time, because there's a lot of criticism about Burns being a womanizer, which he was. I'm not saying that he wasn't, but in addition to being that, he had a great appreciation for women and their value in life and society. So here's a song that I sing, it's called, it has that line in it, remember? Women are perfect, they are the perfect, nature's perfect being is woman. So here is the song, it's called Green Grow the Rashes All. There's no big care on every hand, in every hour that passes on. What signifies the life of man, and 24 the lasses old. Green grow the rashes on, green grow the rashes on, oh, oh. The sweetest hours that her eyes spend, were spent among her lasses all. The worldly race may wretches chase, and wretches still may fly them all. And though at last they catch them fast, their hearts can never enjoy them all. But give me a canny hour at Ian, my arms about my dearie hole, and worldly cares and worldly men may all get up to our dearie hole. Green grow the rashes on, green grow the rashes on, oh, oh. The sweetest hours that her eyes spent was spent among the lasses all. Green grow the rashes on, green grow the rashes on, oh, oh. The sweetest hours that her eyes spent was spent among the lasses all. For you, seduce, you sneer at this, you're now but senseless asses all. The wisest man the world has saw, you dearly love the lasses all. All nature swears the lovely dears, her noblest work she classes all. Her plenteous hand she tried on man, and then she made the lasses all. And now, green grow the rashes all, green grow the rashes all, oh, oh. The sweetest hours that her eyes spent are spent among the lasses all. And now, green grow the rashes all, green grow the rashes all, oh, oh. The sweetest hours that her eyes spent are spent among the lasses all. We know the rashes, we know the rashes. The sweetest hours that her eyes spent are spent among the lasses all. A little bit of blues in there at the end. Well, I hope you're having a good time. I am. Happy birthday, Robert Burns. He would have been 261 years old had he been alive. Thank you to my friend Kayvon Zahedi for passing that piece of information on. Yes, I'm proudly dressed up, as my friend pointed out. This is a little outfit I put together a few years back. But it's not completely authentic, but it draws, as I said, the truths or the trousers are what they would have worn at that time in Scotland. And they would have worn these kind of trousers at that time in general Europe, even in colonial places like America and other colonial parts of the world that had been colonised by the Brits. And but European style, British style, everything. It was these pants. And in Scotland they were prohibited from wearing plaids, so few people wore the kilt. And this is a typical high-collared vest from the time, and floral shirt with ruffles in it. I got the coat, but it's too warm to wear the coat. The coat I got was completely woolen coat with a high collar, the frock coat, really beautiful coat. But that was the style of the time. This kind of I guess we'd call it elegant style. People would get dressed up to go places because, especially the working classes, they would spend most of the time just in cheap garments, the garments that they would wear all the time. It wasn't as if they had special clothes. Maybe they had something special that they wore for a funeral or for a wedding, but a really special occasion. Otherwise, they were just in very cheap, very threadbare type clothing. So this is definitely an elegant and expensive get-up from the time. And Burns would dress like this when he went to Edinburgh, and when he went as a celebrity. He got himself a special set of clothes, and it was something like this. So that's why you'll see Burns impersonators or reenactors dressed up this way, because they're trying to capture that spirit. Now, later on in his life, after he'd been to Edinburgh and realised there was no way that, he felt that he wouldn't get support for his publications, his future publications, because he refused to write in anything but the Scottish dialect. So he focused his attention on collecting fragments of Scottish songs and poems and stories that he had heard and learned his entire life. It was something that had interested him his entire life, was this rich heritage of Scottish storytelling, song writing, and poetry writing, and poetrifying. This hobby that he had of writing poems also extended to learning songs and poems of others. And as he did so, he would come across people who would sing these songs that he never knew or that he'd heard, but he never knew who wrote them. And so this, when later in life in Edinburgh, when he was in Edinburgh, he would meet people who were seriously interested in this. In other words, they wanted to record this kind of literature, this kind of Scottish literature for all time. They wanted somebody, and they had people that were going out and they were collecting up these fragments and recording them, and they called it the Scottish Museum, and I think there were several of them, but that's what they were. They were books that had been compiled, and they contained obscure Scottish songs and poems that nobody knew who wrote them or anything like that. Now, of course, Burns being Burns, he went a step further, and when he found something that he liked or something that he remembered, if he wasn't impressed with it, he'd add his own, to his own 2 cents worth, as it were. and he'd clean it up, or he'd make it rhyme, or he'd extend it, or he'd add some verses of his own. And a lot of the poems and songs that we attribute to Burns exclusively weren't exactly his. Not a lot of them, but some of the more famous ones later in his life that we attribute to Burns, or that we don't, but that were became famous as Scottish songs, were created in this fashion. In other words, Burns would remember an old song or something, or an old poem that he'd heard somebody speaking about or writing, and he'd take it and he'd clean it up, he'd make it rhyme, and that would become an entry into the Scottish Museum. And the reason I'm telling you this is because that is how Auld Lang Syne, the song that everybody sings at New Year's, that's how it came about. Because Burns didn't write it, but it was something that he remembered from his youth, as it were. And he listened to it all this time. And he also remembered a correspondence that he had with one of his benefactors, one of the people that financed his book of poems, a lady by the name of Mrs. Dunlop. And the story goes that as far as Auld Lang Syne is concerned, he had been corresponding with her about an up-and-coming meeting that he was arranging with an old friend whom he hadn't seen for ages. And the friend had gotten back in touch with Burns and was reaching out to, patch things up. And Burns, in his correspondence with this lady, by the name of Mrs. Dunlop, mentioned this song, Auld Lang Syne, and the sentiment in it, because when he went to visit his old friend, with whom he wasn't sure if they were going to get along because they hadn't parted on the best of terms, he told Mrs. Dunlop that after he had seen her, he thought how appropriate that message in the old song, Auld Lang Syne, where it says, you have to let bygones be bygones, and maybe you would have a drink for old time's sake, and just let all those things go by the wayside, and live for the present, and in the present we're friends and we're here, and we can just let bygones be. So that was how that sentiment, should old acquaintance be forgotten, never brought to mind, that's how it evolved out of a song that Burns remembered, and out of a meeting that he had with an old friend whom he was dreading meeting because he wasn't sure if they would get along after all the time that they'd been apart, and they'd never parted on the best of terms. But it turns out, just by letting bygones be bygones, that they were able to be friends still. So, I'd like to do that song for you now, Auld Lang Syne. And the other thing about that song is that there were two versions of it. So I'm going to sing both versions. Yeah, because at the time, maybe they'd write 2 or 3 versions of the song would be out at one time. You could sing it one way, sing it the other way. The one that became popular is the one that you sing at New Year's because of a guy called Lawrence Welsh, who used to have a New Year's show every New Year's. He'd sing Auld Lang Syne every New Year's. So that's how it became popular, that version. But I'm going to sing a couple of versions, that one and another one. Here's the other one first. Should old acquaintance be forgot, on a weary foot, soon old lang syne. Each all he peeled in the burn, from morning sun till dine, but seas between us great road, soon old lang syne. For old lang syne, my dear, for old lang syne, we'll take a cup of kindness yet. For old lang syne, and here's a hand my trusty fear, and he's a hand of thine, and we'll take a right good holy walk for old lang syne. Everybody, for old lang syne, my dear, for old lang syne, we'll take a cup of kindness yet. For old lang syne. And the crowd goes wild. So there you go, Auld Lang Syne, story in two versions. Hope you enjoyed it. Beautiful guitar work, they say. Auld Lang Syne. Yes, sir. Thank you very much, folks. You know, even though you're not here with Guy Lombardo, is it Guy Lombardo? Probably Guy Lombardo. I wish I had a sidekick, because I make so many mistakes with my history and all that. It'd be good to have somebody making fun of me, that would my sideman. But there you go. Now, you might be saying, Mike, you've left out the most important part of the Burns Supper, which is, of course, the address to the haggis, or the haggis itself, which is, the eating part of the supper, and the whiskey. Now, the whiskey I don't have, because I'm becoming, sad to say, I'm becoming a teetotal, because I can't take the drink anymore. The beer makes me fall asleep. I just have a beer, an hour later I can hardly keep my eyes open. And the whiskey, whilst I enjoy it, gives me a headache. So, what can you do? So I just like to toast Burns by reciting the address to the haggis for anybody who is eating the haggis, or who intends to eat the haggis at the Burns supper. Have a wee dram of whiskey for me, and what they traditionally do is the haggis gets brought in, and they put some whiskey over the haggis, and they set it on fire and they have a flaming haggis. I think it's a kind of a nod to some kind of French tradition or something. I don't quite get it myself. But anyway, here is the address to the haggis. Fair fa, your honest, sonsy face, great chieftain o' the puddin' race, aboon them all ye tak your place. Page, tripe, or thern, weel are ye worthy o' a grace as lang's my hair. The groaning trencher there ye fill, your hurdies like a distant hill. Your pen would help to mend a mill in time of need, while through your pores the dews distill like amber bead. His knife, see a rustic labour decked, and cut ye up wi' ready theft, trenching your gushing entrails brecht like ony ditch. Then, horn for horn, they stretch and strive. They'll take the hindmost, on they drive, till their wheel-swallowed kites belive are bent like drums. The old good man mayst like to rive, baith anchor homes. Is there that o'er his French ragout, or olio that would stow a sou, or fricassee would mak her spew wi' perfect scunner, looks down wi' sneer in view, sneer and scorn for view, on sicker dinner. Poor devil, see him o'er his trash, as feckless as a withered lash, his spindle shank, a good whiplash, his knee a knit, through bloody flood, or field to dash. Oh, how unfit! But mark the rustic, haggis fed, the trembling earth resounds his tread, clapping his willy knave a blade, he'll mak it whistle, and legs, and arms, and heads will sned like taps a thistle. Ye powers, wha mark mankind your care, and dish them out their bill of fare. Old Scotland wants nae skinking wear that jouts and luggies, but if you wish her great for prayer, gie her a haggis. Now at this point, of course, everybody's clapping and running to the dinner table to get their dinner because they're starving, and haggis, for me, it's a great meal. It's not the greatest meal, but it's a great meal. Now sometimes say, Mike, it's the greatest meal. Come on, if it's not Scottish, it's haggis. But I mean, if it's not Scottish, if it's not haggis, it's well, you know what I'm saying. Anyway, but I love haggis. Now, when I went to Scotland last time, I had haggis fritters in one place I went to in Edinburgh, and those were delicious. Haggis fritters with, what was it they had? I think they had salt and vinegar and all kinds of stuff with it. And then I was over at my friend's place on the other side of the Forth. I can't remember what it's called. It was Glenrothes, maybe? No. Anyway, I went in a little, seaside pub there, and it got a haggis and something mixed, and that was delicious. Patties. So, if you're going to go to Scotland, and even if you're not, if you get the opportunity to eat haggis, make sure it's good, it's well prepared, because sometimes it's not. But and you have to prepare it well. If you get the opportunity, eat some haggis, it's delicious. Well folks, I'd just like to say thank you very much for tuning in and sharing this Robert Burns special supper from the mountains of western North Carolina. This is the Meadowlark Motel in Maggie Valley, and it's my home here, and I do this every Sunday, and this Sunday is just special because it's Robert Burns' birthday, so we made it all about Burns this Sunday. But next Sunday I'll be back, the Blaxcotsman, fireside, Sunday afternoon fireside concerts right here by the fire, and please tell your friends, tune in, check out the blackscotsman.com for other Black Scotsman products that you can enjoy. And we're going to finish off now with a little song, of course, that you know. And I don't know if Burns wrote it, but he should have. It's called Loch Lomond. Burns didn't write it. You take the high road and I'll take the low road, and I'll be in Scotland for you. But me and my true love will never meet again on our bonny, bonny banks of Loch Lomond. By yon bonny banks and by yon bonny braes, where the sun shines bright on Loch Lomond, where me and my true love will ever want to gain on our bonny road, and I will be in Scotland a-fogging. But me and my true love will never meet again on the bonny, bonny banks of Smokies. Was there that we parted by yon shady glen, on the steep, steep side of Benlomond, or in the purple hue, the healing hills review, and the moon coming out in the gloaming night. You take the high road, and I'll take the low road, and I'll be in Scotland a-fogging. But me and my true love will never meet again on the bonny, bonny banks of Smokies. The wee birdies sing, and the wildflowers spring, and in sunshine the waters are sleeping. But the broken heart, it kens nae second spring, though the wafer may cease through your greeting. You take the high road, and I'll take the low road, and I'll be in Scotland a-fogging. But me and my true love will never meet again on the bonny, bonny banks of Smokies. Thank you very much. See you next week. Tune in 3 o'clock Sunday afternoon. Fireside concert with